Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. It's so good to see so many familiar faces and also just have people I don't know also joining our wonderful panel of collaborators here. My name is Joanna Gardner-Huggett. I'm very honored to chair this panel, 50 Years of Committee on Women in the Arts, Looking Back, Moving Forward. As a faculty member at DePaul University in Chicago, my institution acknowledges that we live and work on traditional native lands that are home to well over 100 different tribal nations. We extend our respect to all of them, including the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa. I just want to give a brief introduction to our panel, introduce our panelists, and do some housekeeping rules, and then I want to turn it over to this great group of people to give their presentations. In 1972, the Committee on Women in the Arts, or CWA, was founded as the Committee on the Status of Women to examine discrimination against women in the arts. From 1978 to 79, Mary Garrett coordinated a study of the status of female faculty in the US, and Marjorie Oak conducted a second iteration in 1996. The CWA also established the Award for Distinction, which in 2007 became the CAA Distinguished Feminist Award, a proposal initiated by Diane Burko with support from Firma Fox Hofrichter. Former CWA Chair Midori Yoshimoto will discuss this history this morning. Most recently, Ann Schwartz founded the Interview Project to collect women's artists' oral histories, and today we will also learn about Carron P. Little's 50/50 initiative, as well as members' participation in COVID conversations with other CAA committees at the height of the pandemic. This session reflects on both the committee's achievements and challenges by inviting previous and current members and chairs to discuss their work with the CWA. This project or this panel also complements our current archival campaign, which I will provide a link to in the chat. As a scholar of feminist collective practice and the current chair of CWA, I'm very conscious that these collaborations are not always well documented. And as we enter our 6th decade, we want to use this anniversary to consider what we should learn from our past as we plan our future. It's a real pleasure to be joined by Judith K. Brodsky, who is Distinguished Professor Emerita, Department of Visual Arts at Rutgers University. She has been involved in with CAA since her first annual conference in 1969, serving on the CAA board and as president of the board from 1994 to 96. Ferris Olin is Distinguished Professor Emerita at Rutgers University, serving as CWA committee member from 1995 to 99, and then continued as the committee chair through 2001 when she was elected to the board of CAA, then elected CAA vice president of committees. Midori Yoshimoto, former chair of the CWA, is an associate professor of art history and gallery director at New Jersey City University. Recently, Yoshimoto curated a major survey of Japanese American artist Shigeko Kubota, which toured 3 museums in Japan. Carron P. Little, a former CWA member, is an interdisciplinary artist and cultural producer, organizing Out of Sight Chicago, a network and a platform for public performance art practices. And Kalliopi Minioudaki is an Athens and New York-based independent scholar and curator and former chair of CWA. Kalliopi's new co-edited book with Mona Hadler is Pop Art and Beyond, Gender, Race, and Class in the Global 60s. Zoe Charlton, a current member of CWA. If minding her own business was a quiz, Zoe Charlton would willingly fail. Zoe shares creative, learning, and solidarity spaces with others. Therefore, the possibility of minding her own business is an improbability. I love that bio. Each panelist will take 7 minutes to address the following questions. How and why did you join CAA or CWA? How did your work with the CWA intersect with your artistic practice, scholarship, and writing, or curatorial projects with other feminist activists or community organizations? What was the most important part of your work with CWA? What kinds of projects or issues should CWA consider as it moves into its 6th decade? I will draw on some specific themes shared during the presentations, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. A bit of housekeeping. During questions and answers, I kindly ask that you use the raise your hand function on the lower right-hand side of your screen. And turn on your camera if possible when you're called on. Or you can place comments in the chat. I will alternate between the raised hands and the chat during our discussion. And it's my hope that this conversation provides a platform for further projects, which will better highlight the CWA's long history and help frame a path for the next 5 decades. So welcome and thank you. And we'll get started with Judy Brodsky.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here, and thank you so much for the nice introductions, Joanna. Ferris and I both want to say that we want to dedicate our talks to Faith Ringgold, whose major retrospective opened yesterday at the new museum, and it's so wonderful to see her honored in that way and recognized. And of course, Faith was very much involved in CAA and CWA many years ago. So my first contact with CAA was right after I received my MFA. I was living in Washington, D.C. 53 years ago, 1969, and the annual conference was being held right down the street from me at the Sheraton on Connecticut Avenue. I was so excited. I got all dressed up to go to the convocation reception, but I walked in the door of the ballroom and I walked out. I couldn't face the sea of middle-aged white men in gray suits with striped ties, not a woman or black or brown person in sight. Of course, if it had looked like this convocation reception of the 1990s, I would have stayed. Mary Garrard was ending her tenure as president of the WCA. She thought Diane Burko, who had been the initiator of Philadelphia Focuses on Women in the Visual Arts, commonly referred to as Focus, would be an excellent replacement. But Diane declined. She had a new baby and she was just starting her career as an artist. Instead, Diane suggested me, another of the Focus organizers, and I accepted. Becoming involved in the feminist art movement through Focus had changed my life. It really had, and I was excited for the opportunity to continue working for equality for women in the visual arts. Becoming president of the National WCA in 1976 led me to my lifetime involvement with CAA, at which, as Joanna pointed out, I served as president in the 1990s. Anne Sutherland Harris had just replaced Linda Nochlin, who was the first chair of the Committee on Women in the Arts, and my first action was to meet with Anne. The CWA and the WCA continued to work together throughout my tenure as president of the WCA. The art historian Sheila McNally was the third chair of the CWA, followed by Mary Garrard. It's hard for me to separate the activities of the CAA Committee on Women in the Arts and the Women's Caucus for Art. In those days, the WCA and the CWA worked together to persuade CAA to make changes to end the discrimination against women in the field of the visual arts. Here are some of the key accomplishments initiated by the WCA that the members of the CWA worked to put through in the 1970s. The first was the statistical study. This is before the one that Joanna referred to, the statistical study of 164 art and art history departments to quantify the anecdotal information that women were being discriminated against in hiring, promotion, and salaries. The next was to change the way the Placement Bureau worked. Norma Browdy, then a member of the Committee on Women in the Arts, ran a WCA Placement Bureau for women for a few years until CAA changed its Placement Bureau procedures. Third was to change insurance and pension conditions, to extend insurance benefits for pregnancy, and to equalize the pension amounts for men and women. If you can believe it, women were being paid less on the basis that they lived longer. The next was to change the rules for the Porter Prize, which was intended to reward new scholars. The rules were that it was for those under 35. But unlike men, most women didn't receive their PhDs until after 35. The WCA and the CWA, working together, persuaded the CAA board to pass a new rule, this time for work done within 10 years after receiving the PhD, thus opening it up for women candidates. I have to state that regrettably, we were all white women and we're not yet thinking about the issues for Black and brown women. But we did establish the principle of social justice as a fundamental value for CAA. And only a few years later, women like Faith Ringgold, Leslie King Hammond, and Lowery Stokes Sims expanded CAA's commitment to diversity and inclusivity on race and ethnicity, as well as gender parity. Working with WCA and CAA was a training ground for me and for many other women. We learned how to make our presence felt, how to organize, and how to lead. Many of us became the next generation of department chairs, deans, provosts, and in the case of Ophelia Garcia, twice a college president. And we introduced principles of social justice and equality wherever we went. The feminist art movement was also important to me in my personal work as an artist, writer, and curator. Once I was introduced to feminist art theory, everything I wanted to do or was doing in my own work already fell into place. I became a mature artist, writer, curator at that point, a wholly feminist one. At Rutgers, Ferris, Olin, and I founded the Rutgers Institute for Women in Art, curated the Dana Women Artist Series, which has shown over 700 women identified artists over the last 50 years, and established the Feminist Art Project. Creating the Rutgers Center for Innovative Print and Paper, now renamed the Brodsky Center in my honor, was perhaps the most important community activity I undertook. I founded the center in 1986. Over the 36 years of its existence so far, it has provided over 350 artists the opportunity to create new work in printmaking and hand paper making. I set up the center long before the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement, with the mission to provide opportunities to women artists and artists of color, with the result that of the 350 plus Brodsky Center artists and residents, 60% have been female and 40% Black and brown. And residencies are only part of what the Brodsky Center did and still does. We marketed the works created to museums, with the result that a number of museums acquired their very first artworks by women artists or Black or brown artists, thanks to our efforts. And I realized that feminist art concepts were embedded in my art practice. Here are two early prints with feminist content and style, and two of my most recent works, self-portraits reflecting the anxieties of this plague era. When I look back on all my feminist involvement with CAA, I would say that going on the CAA board and working on CAA's first strategic plan back in 1987, 1988 was probably the most important. We built social justice into that plan, led by the late Paul Arnold, then president of the board, and Susan Ball, the newly appointed executive director. We established a fellowship program for PhD and MFA candidates of color to change the composition of the field, and built in many other programs and goals that resulted in making the CAA more responsive to the needs of all its members. The organization has since had its ups and downs, but the goal of social justice and equality for the profession has been maintained and is being nurtured by the present leadership. I would also say that our present activity of documenting the 50 years of feminism at CAA is about as important an activity as any that we are undertaking. What should the CWA do now? Here are a few ideas to consider. First, create the archive that documents the 50 years of feminism at CAA. Otherwise, the erasure that plagues women and Black and brown people will occur again. Second, lead CAA in efforts to serve Black and brown and non-binary members to achieve social justice in the field of the visual arts. Next, help CAA raise an endowment to fund the annual conference or other activities to reduce membership and conference registration costs, which prohibit many women identified and BIPOC people in the field to forego involvement in CAA. And four, develop a network of international interrelationships with institutions and people through virtual and in-person contributions. So we continue to celebrate our 50 years of feminist art, 1972 to 22, and I turn the podium over to my colleague and dear friend and collaborator, Ferris Olin.
Thank you, Judy. I want to acknowledge that Judy and I are sitting in Princeton, New Jersey, on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape peoples, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through so many generations. The Lenni Lenape are a matrilinear society who inhabited the area now known as Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey for thousands of years prior to European colonization. In 1995, as Joanna said, I joined the Committee on Women in the Arts and then became its chair in 1999 to 2001. My appointment to the CWA came about through self-nomination. And since Judy Brodsky had just been elected president of CAA, I was catalyzed to offer my expertise and efforts. I had just come off a 9-year administrative stint as Associate Director of Rutgers Institute for Research on Women and the Executive Officer of the Laurie, New Jersey Chair in Women's Studies, where internationally known senior scholars, activists, and policymakers came to campus on a rotating basis to teach seminars and give public lectures on cutting-edge interdisciplinary topics in women's studies. During the same period, I also returned to graduate school to begin studies and then subsequently finish my PhD in art history with the added benefit of being knowledgeable and exposed to the new scholarship on gender, race, class, and sexuality in other humanities and social sciences disciplines. I then changed jobs at Rutgers with assignments to establish a new research center focused on women's leadership and to acquire primary source documents in that area, while also developing new research tools using emerging technologies. Recognizing women's leadership in the arts, one of my first tasks was to begin collecting the papers of women artists for that center, such as Miriam Shapiro, Diane Burko, and Faith Ringgold, as well as the records of feminist art organizations like the Women's Caucus for Art, National Association of Women Artists, and Heresies Collective. In addition, I was appointed curator of the Dana Women Artists Series, the oldest exhibition series for emerging and established women artists. All these activities provided the knowledge and expertise for my participation with the CWA. Judy Stein was chairing the committee when I joined it and set its research agenda to update Mary Garrard's 1981 statistical summary of the status of women in the visual arts. Because CWA members lived along the Boston-Washington corridor and Zoom meetings were not yet available to us, the committee met 3 to 4 times a year in apartments of New York City-based members. This allowed us time to plan for the project, as well as for creating the committee's annual conference sessions. We were successful in getting the CAA board to initiate the new survey, as well as allocate financial resources and clerical support. And as Joanna said, Marjorie Oak directed the project, which was sponsored by both the CWA and the Committee on Cultural Diversity. With CAA's imprimatur, the survey of art history and studio departments to monitor the status of women and people of color in art professions was distributed in the late 1995. To attempt to capture the trends, it sampled 2 years, 1987 to 88 and 1995 to 96. The CAA newsletters in January and again in March 1996 reported the questionnaires were mailed out to 157 US graduate visual arts departments, and then listed the 65 schools that had not yet complied, perhaps to shame them to complete their survey. By the time the results were made public in 1998, 107 universities had sent in their information to CAA. You've been reading the preliminary findings, and later the final report was mounted on the CAA website. However, now we can no longer access that report online. One of the future projects the Committee on Women in the Arts might consider is to sponsor another updated survey about the status of women and people of color, unless the management systems of CAA now uses already captures that data, and also to request CAA to reinstall the 1998 report on the website for historical research. In addition to the statistical analysis of the professions, the CWA also established in 1995 a recognition award presented to recipients at the annual conference program scheduled at a very unpopular time, breakfast. Despite the early hour, the ceremonies were always oversubscribed. I think that was because the event was one of the few times then that feminists could come together at CAA to network and to catch up. Also, while I was chair of the CWA, I also expanded the numbers of awards that were permitted. And I was very happy that one of our members, Susan Messer, created unique awards for each of the recipients. Lastly, as we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of feminist art, I am reminded that so many of the pioneers have died. 3 of the women pictured from the 2000 awards breakfast are no longer alive, and 1 is in her late 90s. Perhaps the CWA could consider collecting some of those important histories through interviews and oral histories of those feminist art pioneers who are now seniors and make them available as podcasts sponsored by CAA. When I began to research women artists in the 1960s and later in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it was difficult to find primary sources or even large numbers of published books and articles on women artists. Much has changed since then, but I know from my own experiences at Rutgers, it is difficult to get artists to organize their papers and archives, especially later in life, as well as to donate them to archival repositories. There are now several archival and library institutions with declared intentions of acquiring and organizing feminist artists' papers, among them the Archives of American Art, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and Rutgers Miriam Shapiro Archives on Women Artists. As a future project, the Committee on Women in the Arts might take up the mantle to encourage feminist visual arts professionals and organizations to ensure their personal papers and records are acquired by scholarly facilities. This would stem the tide of the erasure of women artists and women in the arts professions. Such resources could provide scholars in the future research materials to curate and write the histories of the past 50 years, as well as the present. Thank you. Oops, I lost it. There we go.
Thanks so much, Ferris.
Mhm.
And next we have Midori.
Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here among all the illustrious feminists. And also, of course, it is a really hard job to follow after Judy and Ferris. I'd like to talk to you about the years in which I served as a member and the chair of the Committee on Women in the Arts. I also like to acknowledge and honor that I'm speaking on the ancestral lands of the still living and still sovereign Munsee Lenape people from current city of Jersey City, New Jersey. My work intersected with feminism for the first time through my dissertation on Japanese women artists in New York, which I completed in 2002. The publication of this book in 2005 led me to numerous opportunities and eventually to nomination in CWA, which I think Ferris played a role in that. When I became a CWA member, Eleanor Dickinson was a chair, and I heard that she was chair for a long time, which I don't know how many years. 10 members consisted of artists, many of whom were also Women's Caucus for Art members and art historians. As Ferris mentioned, CWA had given its own annual recognition awards to artists and artists and art historians curators during the annual conference since 1998. Organizing the award ceremony and selling tickets to cover the cost of catering was a major concern of the committee, in addition to organizing panel discussions on women-centered topics, which I posted here on the same slides. The first award ceremony I was involved in organizing was held in Boston in 2006. I gathered biographies of the recipients and edited them and contacted the award presenters. Then member Caroline Manosovitz offered her own paintings as the award gifts to Moila and Trin. So that year we awarded Moila Loth, the art historian, and Trin Ming Ha, the filmmaker. 2006 was the significant year when the groundbreaking exhibitions WAC, Art and the Feminist Revolution and Global Feminisms, were held, and the Feminist Art Project was launched to amplify the momentum in promoting women and feminism in art. I became the New Jersey coordinator of the TFUP as well as the chair of CWA. And I collaborated with Dina Mueller, who was on the board of WCA then, to organize the joint award ceremony between CWA and WCA for CA. Although I dreamt big of having the ceremony hosted by the museums such as American Folk Art Museum, which had been recently built, the cost was prohibitive. And so we held it at the Hilton Hotel on Saturday. I'm sharing my email that I was trying to secure location, the venue for the reception. And it's interesting that all these anecdotes pop up when I look back on my Gmail. That year, CWA awarded Judy Brodsky and Ferris Olin, who were the major force behind the Feminist Art Project and served various roles in CAA and WCA and beyond. That same year, CWA proposed CAA to incorporate the CWA award in its annual awards of distinction. When the award function originally I'm not reading all of this, sorry for lots of text, but just to pick up the most important part, with the award function officially becoming part of CAA, our committee will be able to focus on other pressing activities, such as monitoring the status of women in the academic, gallery, and museum worlds. CWA will also develop panels and projects furthering its current focus on feminism in the arts. So that was one of the main purpose to push that new award to be part of the CAA's overall distinction, awards of distinction. And many members of the committee felt that the current title, Committee on Women in the Arts Annual Recognition Award, mouthful to begin with, would no longer sufficiently distinguish itself in a field where many recent honorees of other CAA awards have been women. The new CWA award seems especially timely when many feminism-inspired exhibitions and projects are taking place around the country and are raising awareness of the importance of feminism in the arts. So in the meantime, before the new Feminist Award was instituted, we had another award ceremony in Texas. Delia Montoya, Chicana artist and educator in Texas, was a member of CWA, and she organized a CWA-sponsored panel on Chicana art in 2008. That year, we decided to award two major figures of that panel in Chicana art. In 2008, CAA formed a task force to evaluate the committees, and we needed to demonstrate the relevance of our committee. Jorge Daniel Veneciano, whom I recruited to the committee as perhaps the first male member, wrote this justification. As a result, we were able to stay. From here, I know text is too small. I will gladly share all these material to your archive, Joanna. but to just pick the most important part that Daniel was raising, why the Committee on Women in the Arts remains relevant. Well, so he was defending that it does not follow the leveling of the numerical difference indicates the leveling of sexism, relationship of power, not a function of numbers. The gender-specific matter of women in the arts has always been addressed to the matter of sexism in our field of study and as in society. So this slide was mainly to point out that even though we instituted the new feminist award, there was a backlash against it and a backlash against CWA itself by the then board members. I remember clearly in 2008, so that was hard. But so we survived, and initial Distinguished Feminist Award went to Guerrilla Girls in 2009. So many of you might remember this happened in CA annual conference in Los Angeles. So this I also like to mention that last year I was nominated to be the jury of the Feminist Award, but due to the limited number of nominations and there's a miscommunication with CAA, we had to unfortunately table the selection process to the next year, which is very unfortunate thing, and I like to apologize for that. When I became jury, it was a little too late to rectify the situation, and with that acknowledgement, I'd like to suggest that revisiting of the definition of the Feminist Award and the method of nominating the nominees to make sure we include the diverse candidates and reach out to all the specialists in all different fields of art history to nominate. So that's my end of talk, but I'd like to really discuss this fully in this panel discussion, and thank you so much for including me.
Thanks so much, Midori. And next, I'm sure we'll have time to discuss that. I think that's really important. Next is Carron.
So just while the slides are coming up, I just want to thank everybody for being here today to acknowledge 50 years of feminism within the organization of the College Arts Association. And I want to say a big thanks to Joanna for inviting me to be part of this panel with these esteemed amazing women. So thank you so much. And my name is Carron Little, and I work as an interdisciplinary artist, fusing art and public performance practice. And I'm the cultural producer of Out of Sight Chicago. I really come out, I was a student of Katie Deepwell, Panina Barnett, Janice Jeffries, and I've had lunch with Griselda Pollock. So I come out of the British feminist movement. I'm going to discuss my artistic practice and curatorial work that intersect with feminism and the work of the Committee of Women in the Arts. And by sharing, I've got many examples, but this example is from a working bank, and the performance was called Unto Each One's Own Safe Plus More. And this was a 3-year project that I did in with the Uptown neighborhood in Chicago. And the project was calculating what people have not been paid due to racial, gender, queer pay gap. And this is, I've collated the data from this performance, and you see one of the graphs here. And this is an ongoing project that I've done in different contexts. And this was the follow-up, the performance that I did in 2015 called Love Over Money. And people also received a check here. Many of my projects with neighborhoods and cities are civic engagement projects where I interview a diverse group of people in terms of race, class, ethnicity, and differently abled bodies. And I gift each person a poem. And this becomes a starting point for public performance. And the poetry really seeks to rewrite the local narrative of place, sharing the invisible stories that we don't listen to, and bringing transgenerational audiences together to form new networks over time. As an artist and cultural producer, I situate my work in public sites and have been organizing the public performance festival in Chicago called Out of Sight since 2011. Over the pandemic, we have pivoted into a network and a platform for the sharing of public performance art practices from around the globe. And this is very much a collaborative project. This work seeks to create surprise embodied encounters for the public as they go about their everyday lives. And I've witnessed how these random encounters have the capacity to shift the dynamic of patriarchal power and white supremacist power that operates in public places, and in doing so can facilitate a reclamation of sight. And Cheryl Oring was a key factor in me joining the CWA. So this brings me to the third question, which is why I've been asked to speak today, and to discuss my work on the Committee of Women in the Arts. I was elected onto the committee in 2018, and in 2019 proposed the 50-50 initiative at our meeting in New York that was unanimously voted on. The purpose of this policy was to create 50% women-centered representation at the College Arts Association in 2020 in acknowledgement of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the US. It is important to note that in articulating this policy for the committee, I really wanted us to think about 50% representation in terms of race, class, differently abled bodies, and to embrace intersectional and transnational discourses in acknowledgement of the fraught history of inclusion in the US. This initiative was co-authored by Stephanie Sparling Williams, Basha Slawinska, and Kalliopi Minioudaki, who was the chair of the committee at the time. And as Michelle Obama says, it takes a village. And in proposing this initiative, it was really about envisioning the process of how it could be implemented and realized. And it was a key factor of this was Melissa Potter being elected as chair of the executive committee, and also my research into the work of the executive director at the time, Hunter, who I knew would support this initiative. Lastly, I would like to propose that the 50-50 initiative becomes a blueprint for institutions moving forward. I would like to invite the Committee of Women in the Arts to hold a letter writing campaign to hold cultural institutions accountable for creating 50% women-centered representation in terms of race, class, differently abled bodies, sexual orientation. And I think we need to tackle museums. In Linda Vallejo's talk yesterday, she shared a drawing of how in 2019, museums in the US presented 14% of women artists. This is a dire situation. I want to see publishers looked at, and also academia. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Kalliopi, but I just want to end by sharing this little slide. If I can bring up my slides here. Oops. And we're just going to end with a little bit of a poem from the poem that I wrote during the US election 2020. Over to you, Kalliopi.
Thanks so much, Carron.
Thank you, Carron, also for wrapping it up so powerfully about the initiative. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Joanna, for this invitation. I'm apparently humbled and honored to join such a hugely influential and radical company. As Linda Knocklin student, I owe to the feminist art and art history revolution my own feminist awakening. To address the question that Joanna gave us first, how did I joined from Greece, CAA. I have to say that I joined CAA before actually the Institute of Fine Arts in 1998, while a first-year graduate student at Pratt Institute, before I had any idea where I wanted to take my transition from archaeology, which I studied in Athens, to modern art. And I still remember Professor Diana Ghisolfi strongly advising our class to join CAA as if our identity and life depended on that, and later only I understood why. For a decade, CAA was a source of learning synonymous with a conference that I could not always afford joining unless in New York, but also of intimidation and frustration for the rejection of sessions centering on unknown women or dearth of panels that could fit, despite the change that had happened all along. And something substantially changed even further by the time I joined CWA in 2012 for the first time. And I'm still grateful to Amy Schlegel for nominating me. By then, I had finished my dissertation, Women in Pop, Difference and Marginality, and collaborated for Seductive Subversion, the first exhibition on the topic, marking my commitment to women-identified artists. My research still focuses on women artists in the 60s from a transnational feminist perspective, and my latest work considers racialized domestic paid labor in the expanded context of proto-feminist pop, not evident from the beautiful Yaoundé Olu cover of the book coming out, but since it's the first, I think, in the on pop featuring more women integrated in a book in the discourse, I thought it's worth throwing at least the slide here. With the rest of my work, I try to actively support contemporary artists, curatorially, or women artists, curatorially or otherwise. And sometimes the most difficult task is for those who don't have representation. And of course, they're not rooted in the heart of New York. So the committee seemed the best way to serve as a feminist, an organization, an association that had begun feeling my community, but was not as relevant as I felt it should be still to feminists, though Tifa's Devo panels was weighing on its experience, and so much has changed already since you guys began the revolution. And I served CWA again on a second time from 2017 to 2021. As a member, I devoted myself, the first time, I devoted myself to the WA picks, the exhibition selection that CAA sends every month, including making them more international. And I proposed and chaired the committee's 2014 two-part session on transnational feminism, meant not simply to hone the discussion on feminism, but engage colleagues from outside the US. A ripple effect I felt was of that panel was felt in the composition of the committee. And I mention it only because I still think inclusive, intersectional, international, by which I mean non-US based and trained feminist membership, both for CWA and CAA, should be pursued, and dialogue channels should be cultivated beyond the conference. Learning from elsewhere, quote unquote, and it is a quote, is one of the strategies proposed by Hilary Robinson as means to radicalize feminist pedagogies and resist the hidden structural biases that continue to impact the place of women in the arts. We need to cross notes on the progress, on the setbacks, and on the and continuously keep crossing notes on the resistance strategies, even though solutions must be local. As CWA's 2019 to 21 chair, I can't claim personal contribution, although I did do things too, and I regret that I didn't mention the memorial for Carl name, and I should have had the print that you guys gave me here today. Thank you. And I'm thrilled that my term is associated with the 50-50 initiative. Carron just gave you the details, and it's all her idea that I actively supported. I hope I helped instill and sustain the collective energy that amplified not only the work of the committee in and beyond the 2020 conference, but its feminist values and ethics. It was two difficult years, one without a director and then with the pandemic, of course. I helped planning and funding the CWA reception with the invaluable help of Joanna, of Rachel Middleman, and other members, and of course the leading of Carron, who did also curated a performance program, and I'm surprised that you didn't bring it up, Carron, today. And I did that precisely to celebrate, I mean, Carron was focusing on the politics with her performance program and how to explain and substantiate the depth of the initiative, but also I want us to celebrate the 50-50 initiative and actually use it as a platform to connect. Of course, the pandemic undercut the momentum, but it is in its context that member initiatives outside the scope of the committee's regular workflow or instrumentalizable, let's say, CA activities, enacted in praxis feminist care for the membership. And by this I mean large-scale cross-committee conversation, the first chaired by Stephanie Sparling-Williams, the second co-organized by me and Joan Giroux, and with an immense amount of people involved from other committees too, or intimate Zoom gatherings initiated, for instance, by Basia Sliwinska and Connie Tell, all of which helped members to go through the first difficult days of the pandemic, build community, which I think is something that we still have to keep cultivating as in CAA, and identify pre-existing concerns about the conference and our fields. CWA, I'm not particularly happy to be reminded of this, but also protested intramurally, and also I'm grateful again to Rachel Middleman and Joanna and all the committee for working on this silently, but effectively, not as effectively as it should have been then. We protested the terms of the so-called digital release agreement, the participation agreement of the first virtual conference, and problematized the format it took, including the way it was served. And questioning this way the feminist ethics of the organization, it made felt the fragility of CA's feminist transformation in the face of its sustainability. And I'm not saying this lightheartedly. I'm very happy we are past that, because I think we need this kind of trials to feel more confident about how we move on. So to wrap up, and I haven't looked at my minutes. I don't know how I'm doing, Joanna.
You're okay.
Cut me when I'm not cut.
You're good.
I agree with Ferris that I just want with speed to address the moving forward part, which I would agree with Ferris that resume serving and analyzing the status of women in the arts and cis, trans, BIPOC, able or not. And it's important. And I agree, there was a reference to the 90s survey on the website. It was dropped. I actually kept it as a fragment in our records, because I think we have to have reference to those. I also suggest surveying the state of feminist teaching of art and art history. And I also think we need to explore the experience of CA's women identified members for where to look for the most invisible manifestations of bias and what they need from us. I mean, that's anecdotal and empirical, but my experience from those roundtable cross-committee conversations is that actually we need to dig in, and those consciousness somewhat raising practices still have future in CAA. Apparently, what I think most important, though, given the current moment, is strengthening the advocacy for the most vulnerable members, fighting against the precarity and invisible forms of labor exploitation in the art fields, work with CAA and other organizations and affiliates, including committees, to turn advocacy into change. I know it's easy to say and hard to do, but we can't stop dreaming. And needless to say, and I'll echo now, Carron, I think the 50-50 initiative should not be abandoned. And in addition to what, how she framed it, I think it needs to be activated in multiple forms in collaboration with CA and beyond, and become a vector for a major equity campaign that CA could actually need nationwide. Why not dream big? With such leadership and under such urgency, I think it feels the time is now or never for CA to rethink how it can actually enforce also policies that can impact change for all. And I think there's something to be said about CA's historical attitude to that in light of the early years of the committees. If I have a little, am I done? I'm happy to end here, Joanna, but I have
if you need a second or so, it's fine. We're okay time-wise if you need a tiny bit more time.
Well, I still think we need to find ways to provide resources to women in the arts, and award intersectional feminist art curating, scholarship, and activism, not only achievement, on a more grassroots, fresh, quick level. And publications could be a forum also for synergies there. Fight tokenistic diversity and inclusion, even within regards the committee's composition. Ensure free programming within the context of CA will not disappear, and make sure that we collaborate with the committees that already have those platforms and claim space for free programming ourselves. I'm still thinking I'm part of the committee, by the way. I'm speaking plural. Help women identified artists with no representation, and I'm wrapping it with look back and move forward together. Work on documenting those voices of women artists and beyond. Archive, publicize, learn, and critically unlearn the history of CWA and the feminist art revolution, but also keep in touch with those who have institutional memory and also contributed to the revolution. Perhaps a circle of ex-CWA members as part of the committee's extended friends or advisory circle could be a way to implement this. And of course, going back to issues of liaisons and allies to connect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kalliopi. And now we'll have Zoe.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for inviting me to participate. I'm Zoe Charlton. I have wavy afro hair, like Lionel Richie, circa 1986, silver rimmed bifocals, and skin the deep brown color of chicory coffee. I'm wearing a brown and white spiral dress shirt and yellow beaded lemon wedge earrings that dangle to my jawline. I am grateful to be able to live and work in the unceded ancestral land of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people in Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. I offer my respect to the members of these nations, ashe to the lives and experiences of African, Black American, and immigrant communities that enabled and continue to enable the building of this country. I am a full professor of art at the American University in Washington, D.C. The Department of Art began around 1925, but it wasn't until 1942 that AU, as a joint program with the then Phillips Gallery Art School, which is the Phillips Collection, offered a bachelor's and master's degree. AU became one of the first 3 universities in the nation to offer a graduate degree in studio art. And with that said, I am the first tenured Black professor, let alone full professor, in the history of the Department of Art. Why did I join CAA-CWA? Well, I was introduced to CAA in 1997 while a grad student at the University of Texas in Austin. In 1999, a group of grads got together and we all flew to Los Angeles. And I do not remember what we saw, heard, or did, I remember the warm weather, but I do remember going in and out of lecture halls and being around so many artists at one time. And I do remember the overwhelming job search frenzy of all the artists camouflaged in black, gray, and other matching attire waiting for interviews. My introduction to the CWA was from Connie Tell, an artist, independent curator, and arts administrator who is the project manager at the Feminist Art Project. I first met Connie through programming at TFAP in 2016, when she invited me to co-organize the day of panels with Margot Hobbs for the conference in DC at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And we've been in touch ever since. When I was organizing programming for the WCA in 2018 in Los Angeles at ArtShare LA, it was great to run ideas by Connie and Ann Swartz. And in 2021, Connie reached out to me and suggested that I nominate myself for CWA. And we talked a lot about the work of the committee. The thing about Connie is that she's always engaged and inclusive. So when she calls to talk with me about something, I stop and listen. How does my work with the CWA intersect with other areas of my life, my work and professional lives? Well, the introduction that Joanna read for me is accurate. I am a busybody, and for lots of reasons that aren't germane here. But the bottom line is that I embrace the fact that my experiences in this world are contextual, relational, and conditional. I want everything that I'm involved in to support my values. And it took me a long time to understand that although my choices may shift because of friendships, of politics, and circumstances, my values remain constant, and I don't do anything now that does not align with those values. So here are some of the organizations that I'm a part of. CWA's mission to promote the scholarly, creative, and activist contributions of feminists in the arts aligns with the work of other organizations that I serve on as board members. As a board member, the Washington Project for the Arts, the Maryland State Arts Council, and most recently, Three Walls in Chicago. All three organizations center the work and lives of artists with particular attention to how artists of color are impacted by systemic isms and phobias. Additionally, it's my work with two community collectives, the Circuit and the Blacksmiths, where I found the most alignment with my values. And the Circuit was founded by two artists in 2020, Jameer Richmond Edwards and Helena Metafaria, in the middle of and in response to the murder of George Floyd. Instead of addressing external pressures rooted in white supremacist gatekeeping, our coalition serves as a self-sustaining system of internal support towards Black liberation. The Blacksmiths is a coalition of artists, curators, culture producers, and organizers committed to using the arts to support direct action and civic engagement in the service of Black liberation and equity and Black leadership. My colleague Tim Dowd and I published a volume of essays with 31 contributors called Out of Place, Artists, Pedagogy, and Purpose, available through Punctum Books, both to purchase and as a free download. The volume is structured around three categories of artist scholars. The first are the artist academic who bridges communities and creates projects outside of their job responsibilities. The second are artists who engage in pedagogical initiatives independent of the academy and separate from their studio practices. And the third category are artists who challenge discipline-specific areas of study within academia in favor of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary study. Well, what's the most important part of my work with CWA? Well, I actually haven't started yet. I am a brand new member. But what I'm looking forward to doing is building with the women on this committee in whatever ways I can. I love to work with folks. What kind of projects or issues should or could CWA consider as it moves into its sixth decade? Well, that question brings me to these eager folks, these fine folks in this image. These are former students, now alumni of the MFA program at American University. I think that finding, and this is the current cohort, the graduating cohort, I think that finding stronger connections within pedagogical spaces for CWA would be amazing. When I talk with women identifying folks who are learners in liberal arts environments and art schools about resources, they're looking for organizations to belong to that can provide mentorship and opportunities to engage from the local to national levels. I've been an on and off member of CAA since graduate school, and whether I'm a member or not, I have actually attended every conference, almost every conference, maybe say 3, since 1997. And I specifically go to sessions that are presented by CWA, SAC, or TFAP. So CAA, CWA, SCAC, and TFAP, oh my gosh, all these acronyms have been the most important to me throughout my development as an artist scholar. Judith and Ferris shared the sobering statistics regarding the visibility of Black and Brown women in the arts. I'm interested in the recruitment, retention, and mentorship of Black and Brown women and women identifying folks and non-binary folks who are studying and teaching in academia, specifically at historically and predominantly white institutions of higher learning. I think CWA can increase its presence within local communities to be an important resource for BIPOC and Alana students and young faculty or new faculty in the same ways that it was and continues to be for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zoe. And I'd like to give a round of applause just to all the speakers for their really dynamic comments.